In this lesson, we're going to learn how to create terrains. Alright, so let's go ahead and open up our scene. So if you take a look at the Assets folder, I've created a new folder called Scenes. Now inside of that Scenes folder, I have 07_begin. Go ahead and double click on that, and that will open up this empty project. Now if you want to save your projects, you can simply go up to File, Save Scene As, and then you can save it wherever you would like that to be. In this case, I would save it in the Scenes folder. Alright, so now that we have our scene ready, let's go ahead and create a new terrain. This can be done by going up to the top, going to Game Object, 3D Object, and Terrain. You could also go to the Hierarchy tab, and go to Create, and then 3D Object, Terrain as well. Now with that in your scene, you'll notice that we get this really large white plane that goes across the span of our world here. Whenever you create a terrain, it's a good idea to go ahead and set up your resolution first. So to do this, we'll go over to our inspector and you'll see the terrain settings. Now make sure you have the terrain selected here in your scene or here in the hierarchy. Click on Settings and you'll want to scroll down toward the bottom and you'll see Resolution. Let's change the terrain width to 250. Let's change the terrain length to 250 and also the terrain height to 250. You'll also notice a couple of other parameters like the height map resolution, detail resolution. We're not going to worry about that. We're going to leave it just the same. What that is going to do is it's going to give you a little bit more detail per pixel on your terrain. Now terrains are generated from what's called a height map, which is a grayscale image that the wider the value, the closer the height will be to the 250 maximum. Now anything that is completely black will be at 0, which is flat. So our height map, in this case, is completely black and it's at 0. So now that we have our terrain started, you'll notice that the asset for this terrain is underneath your asset folder. You can go ahead and rename that and just double click on that, or actually if you like you can right click and then you should be able to rename it here. And doesn't look like that. Left click on it once and then give it just a moment and then left click on it again. So let's rename this to Desert. Alright, so once that has been renamed, let's select our terrain again. You can change its actual name. So as you can see here, it's still terrain, but we want that to be Desert in our project. So I'm going to rename that as well. And there we go. Alright, so now let's go over to the first tool, and this is our Raise and Lower tool. Okay, so here you can see that we can choose a number of different brushes. In my case, I'm going to use this really soft brush just to get us started. And then we have the brush size, which we can modify. Let's take this up to about 80 and make it kind of large. And actually, let's go to about 60. And then we have the opacity, which is essentially the strength of the brush. So how fast it will rise or lower. 16 is a pretty good default value. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in, I'm going to start to paint in some hills. And let's go ahead and just kind of paint that in. It might be going a little bit too fast for me. So I'm going to hit Control Z a couple of times. Let's take that opacity down to about 10. And that's a little bit more controllable for me, and I just want to come through and just start to, break up the terrain a little bit. Now you also have the ability to import a height map if you want to do that. And that's done in your settings, and it must be a .raw file. Okay? Now height maps can be generated from a number of different programs. You can generate a raw file from Photoshop. So if you wanted to just do a noise filter and create something that kind of looks like a cloud, you can import that as a height map. You can also generate height maps from Terragen and World Machine. Those are software packages that actually create terrains procedurally, or not procedurally, but parametrically. And then you can export those out as height maps and you can bring them right here inside of Unity. So a number of different ways of doing that. But we're just going to do it right here inside of Unity just to kind of get used to this. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to really quickly just kind of go over these edges. and across the entire surface. And I might actually take the brush size up just a little bit more. And we'll just start to kind of brush this in. And then you can see that it's, just creating a very rough surface at this point. We're trying to create something like a desert. So we don't want anything treacherous like mountains or anything like that. Something that the player could traverse if needed. Okay, and so I'm just kind of breaking it up. And you'll notice that after we finish painting, it kind of smooths itself out a little bit based on the detail. And it kind of down reses, so that way it's easier to work inside of the scene. Okay, so we're just going to come in and we're going to paint this out. Some areas might get a little bit higher than others. That's totally fine. We're just trying to block this in right now. And then what we're going to do after this is I'm going to show you how to lower that terrain so that way we can create pathways. So there is no method to what I'm doing here. It's totally random on what I'm doing. I'm just trying to create some elevations, trying to break the entire thing up. Okay. So once we have that set to something that we're happy with, then what we can do is we can just come in and we can start to create the pathways that we would want for our terrain. Now I'm creating a game here with you that is basically going to be a collection type game. Our collector bot is going to be running around trying to collect enough energy to shut down the mothership, and it will also shut down the enemies. And so you're trying to do that before the enemies touch you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create kind of something like a desert, and we're going to create these pathways that are blocked off by rocks and things like that. So to start creating those pathways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to this little navigation tool up in the corner, and we're going to click on the Y axis, and that's going to give us the top view. And then I'm going to click on the box right here in the middle, and that's going to switch it over to an isometric view. So that way it's truly at the top. Now let's go ahead and grab this brush right here, and I'm going to take my brush size down to maybe about 40 or so. Just kind of see what that looks like. That should be pretty good. And then I'm going to go to the lower of this. So we've been left clicking and holding to raise it up. If we hold down shift, that will actually lower the terrain. So right here in the middle, we're going to create the spot that our mothership is going to be. And so it's going to sit right in there. And the player is always going to have to come back to the middle whenever they collect energy. Okay? And so now what we'll do is we'll come in and we'll just start to create some pathways. It doesn't have to be anything complicated or anything like that. So I'm going to start right up here at the top, and let's hold down shift when we're doing that. Make sure we're lowering that down. And this is just to rough in these paths. If you want, take your opacity up, just so that way you can get that very quickly. Okay, and I'll just come in and I'll just very roughly create some pathways here. Okay, so no real method to any of this. Hold down Alt and the middle mouse button to pan around, and we'll create a pathway that comes up the back here. And let's see, we'll put this right here. And then I'll make a little pathway that goes across here. And we can modify this however we want to. Okay, and we're just kind of breaking this up. And we need a pathway to get to the center from where we're at. Might start to make the brush size just a little bit smaller. And let's go ahead and hold shift. We'll create another pathway. Okay, and we'll start to get a little bit more interesting shapes as we go along here. Okay, and we just want these to kind of terminate into one another. creating something that looks kind of like a maze. And we'll create these little pathways that kind of go off into dead ends and things like that. And we'll make some kind of loop around to where they can't really see around the corner to where that's going. And what that does is it creates an area in which the player thinks that they're going on a journey, but they always come back to the main path that will lead to the main part here. So holding down Shift still, kind of creating these areas here. And then we'll create a couple more paths. Okay, something like that, and then I'll have a couple of dead end paths here. So something along this line. All right, so now if we want to go back to that perspective view, just simply click on that box right there in the middle, and then you can hold Alt and the left mouse button, and you'll kind of see what that looks like. So we've got things that kind of look like plateaus. So how do we know if this is at the right scale? Well, we can do this a couple of different ways. One way to do it very quickly would be to create a 3D object in a capsule. And that's going to create it in our scene. Let's grab our Move tool, and let's just place this on our terrain. I want to get this a little bit closer. And you can see that it's very, very far away. If we need to, we can type in 0 on our Y, and then bring it closer to where we are. And for some reason, it is going down. Not sure why. There we go. So I'm bringing this closer to my map. I just want to see what it looks like when it's on our terrain. So that's going to be about the size of our player. That's a quick way of showing that. We might make these pathways a little bit larger, but I think that we'll do just fine the way it is right now. Another way that you can check your scale is to actually bring in your player character. So this can be done by going to Meshes, Characters, and then we have our little robot. Just place him in the scene just to kind of see what that looks like. Now, we'll also be bringing in those environment pieces to kind of stagger around to create the overall look of our scene. So just to kind of give you an idea of that, go to your prefabs, bring in one of your rocks, one of the large ones, and this will be kind of like the rock wall that you create throughout this. And so you can kind of see how that's going to come together. And you can see that the expanse is pretty large, and that's going to give us plenty of room to run around and collect these little energies to destroy the mothership. And so now what we're going to do, I'm going to delete that out. We're going to keep this terrain. You can modify it however you want. If you want to make it a smaller map, you can do so. But what we're going to do next is we're going to learn how to paint this and give it the desert look that we're looking for. So I'll see you then.